Open any fridge in America and you'll find two things: a condiment that expired in 2012 and a mysterious Tupperware you're too scared to open. But here's the twist. Sometimes those forgotten meals actually taste better the next day. So grab that cold slice, zap that ziti, or risk that mystery carton in the back of the fridge, because today we're going to take a look at why some foods taste better as leftovers. But before we get started, be sure to subscribe to the Weird History Food channel. After that, please leave a comment and let us know what other leftovers-related issue you would like to hear about next. Okay, the topic is leftovers, but the weird history is fresh. So here we go. For most of human history, there wasn't really any such thing as leftovers. Food was precious, hard-won, and rarely wasted. If you didn't finish your portion, someone else in the household would, and any scraps left behind usually went to livestock or into a pot for tomorrow's soup. The idea of casually scraping a plate into the trash would have been unthinkable. That, however, changed during the Great Depression of the 1930s. Suddenly, leftovers weren't just tolerated, they were essential for survival. Families learned to make do with whatever was left from yesterday's meal, and the next thing anyone knew, casseroles, hashes, and soups were national staples. Not because they were glamorous, mind you, but because they stretched food further and made scraps palatable. Cookbooks of the era were filled with recipes explicitly designed to disguise day-old meat or vegetables as new dinner. In a culture where nothing could be wasted, leftovers weren't a punchline, they were patriotic thrift. Of course, one of the reasons leftovers were a rarity prior to the Depression is that when it came to food storage, the options were pretty limited. In those days, food storage meant ice boxes, salting, or canning, none of which made yesterday's chicken particularly appetizing. The real game changer was the refrigerator, but early electric refrigerators of the 1910s and 20s were bulky and expensive. A luxury for wealthy households more likely to use them for champagne than stew. Luckily, by the 1930s and 40s, manufacturers started making smaller, cheaper fridges and marketing them the way Dr. Seuss's Once-ler marketed his Sneeds, as fine somethings that all people need. For the first time in human history, you could keep a Sunday roast until Tuesday without needing a priest on standby. And the advertising leaned hard into that angle. Refrigerator companies pitched thrift as a modern convenience, promising homemakers that they could save meals for tomorrow without feeling shame. All of a sudden, American families had the option to think of food not just as a single serving, but as a something to revisit later. The ability to save food for later changed everything. And by the mid-20th century, portion sizes had ballooned, especially in post-war America, where abundance itself became a cultural flex. And this wasn't limited to just the home. Restaurants got into the act too, and suddenly when you sat down in a diner, you were greeted by a meal big enough for a professional baseball team. Given the significantly larger portions, diners could no longer finish everything they were served. At the same time, restaurants didn't want the bad optics of scraping food into the trash. Enter the doggy bag. Starting in the 1940s, when World War II rationing was still in full effect, some restaurants offered paper bags they branded as pet packets, or bones for Bowser, ostensibly so customers could justify taking uneaten food home for the dog. Wink, wink. Of course, everyone knew the food was really for the humans, but the fun fiction made it more socially acceptable. It also gave folks a chance to talk up their dogs, which all dog owners love to do. So it was just wins all the way down the column. Fast forward to the 1960s, and cities like San Francisco were distributing official doggy bags with cheerful logos. The practice was normalized across the country. Leftovers had gone public. Of course, reheating food in the 1960s involved pans, ovens, stovetops, and who knows what else. Due to all the effort involved, more than a few of those doggy bags wound up rotting in the fridge, or actually being given to the dog. But then in the 1970s, a revolution happened, and it did not involve Iran. We're talking about the rise of the microwave oven. It's old hat now, but at the time, the microwave seemed like a miracle device from a futuristic wonderland, because it turned leftovers into fast food. A plate of spaghetti, for example, could be resurrected in under 2 minutes. Microwave marketing hammered the message. Why cook from scratch when yesterday's dinner could be zap-cooked into today's lunch? Once again, the cultural image of leftovers changed overnight. No longer shameful or second-rate, they became a standard part of modern lifestyle. By the 1980s, cookbooks and magazines were even running planned leftovers recipes, encouraging families to make bigger meals on purpose, knowing the next day would bring an easy encore. By the late 20th century, leftovers had traveled a long road. From Depression-era survival strategy, to wartime thrift, to mid-century social taboo, to a convenience you'd have to be an idiot not to embrace. The result was that their image was a little all over the place. On one hand, leftover meals were a cultural punchline. The sad brown bag lunch, the Tupperware swamp monster, etc., etc. On the other hand, they were a culinary renaissance and tribute to the fruits of modern science. But regardless of which of these views you subscribe to, the point is, leftovers aren't just food scraps in a fridge. They're a time capsule of American history, a story about technology, culture, and a strange journey from survival food to comfort food. There's no denying that some foods just hit different the next day. And if you can't think of any examples, ponder the following. Take pizza, which sits way at the top of the leftover food chain. Cold, reheated, eaten standing in front of the fridge at 3 a.m., somehow the flavors mellow and blend in a way that makes it almost better than when it was fresh. And that's such a universally acknowledged truth that actual scientists have devoted their time to studying why. Then there's pasta, especially the baked kind. Cold ziti or next-day lasagna doesn't just survive refrigeration, it thrives on it. The sauce soaks into the noodles, the cheese firms up, and suddenly you've got yourself a whole new texture profile. Chinese food has a cult following in the Leftovers Hall of Fame. Fried rice, lo mein, General Tso's chicken. They all benefit from a night in the fridge, where the soy sauce and spices have more time to settle into the noodles and rice. And somehow, it just feels right to eat it straight from the carton with that fork you should have washed yesterday. Desserts also get the leftover glow up. Think about pie, cobbler, brownies, tiramisu, pudding. Basically, anything that needs a little time for the layers to set. Left overnight, those flavors meld into a single sweet chorus of deliciousness. And don't forget soup and stew, the Keanu Reeves of leftovers, that somehow gets cooler with age. Give them a night to rest, and the spices get a chance to marry into a richer, deeper flavor. Chili and curry both deserve honorable mention. With their bold spice blends, they almost demand a night in the fridge. The second day gives the heat time to mellow, and the aromatics time to bloom, transforming them into something far richer than when they were originally served. And of course, the MVP of leftovers, turkey. Heck, the entire Thanksgiving holiday is practically engineered around this bird's second act. Think about it, and you'll find that pretty much nobody ever brags about the Thursday turkey. It's always the Friday turkey sandwich that goes down in legend. At this point, the more skeptical among you are probably beginning to suspect that these enhancements are really all just in the mind. But we beg to differ. It's not just you convincing yourself that cold Chinese takeout counts as self-care. There's actual, factual science backing it up. So why do some foods actually taste better the next day? Well, as it turns out, your fridge is less of a graveyard and more of a laboratory. The first big factor is flavor melding. Overnight, ingredients don't just sit together, they interact. Spices migrate, proteins break down, and starches absorb sauces. That's why a chili or stew tastes richer, smoother, and somehow more finished on day 2. Then there's starch retrogradation, a very sciencey way of saying that starch molecules in pasta, rice, and bread reorganize once they've cooled down. Instead of being mushy, the texture firms up in a way our brains interpret as more satisfying. Pizza, of course, deserves its own subsection. Cold, it loses its greasy mouthfeel because fats solidify, while the tangy tomato sauce and umami-rich cheese keep delivering flavor. The acidity of the sauce balances the richness of the cheese, and the crust stiffens in a way that actually makes it easier to eat cold than fresh. In other words, according to science, pizza was practically engineered to win the leftover Olympics. Aromatics like garlic and onion also mellow overnight. Instead of punching you in the face, they blend into the background. creating a smoother, more unified taste. Meanwhile, fats re-solidify as they cool, locking in flavor until reheating melts them back into the dish. That's why next-day turkey or pot roast tastes more savory and tender. Time is literally breaking the proteins down for you. And don't forget booze. Dishes cooked with wine, beer, or spirits, think of beef bourguignon or chili with a splash of stout, taste deeper the next day because the alcohol evaporates while the flavor compounds remain. It's why a bolognese sauce gets better after simmering for hours. And better still after a night in the fridge. Put it all together and the truth is simple. Time, referring to the progression of existence from the past to the future and not the similarly named herb, is an ingredient, one your spice rack just can't possibly compete with. The truly sad part of all this is that for all the foods that taste better the next day, we're still pretty bad at actually eating them. Studies show that Americans waste around 80 billion pounds of food a year, and a good chunk of that is perfectly edible leftovers. That's about 30 to 40% of the entire U.S. food supply winding up in the trash. So why do we ignore them? Well, for starters, there's the issue of forgetfulness. Tupperware gets shoved to the back of the fridge, only to be rediscovered when it's grown fuzz and achieved sentience. Some of it is also psychological. Leftovers get unfairly branded as second-rate, like they're the understudies of the food world. And for some people, that feeling even tips into leftover phobia, a genuine aversion where reheated food feels unsafe or unappetizing. Of course, there are valid safety concerns. According to the USDA, leftovers should only be kept in the fridge for 3 to 4 days before the risk of bacteria outweighs the reward. Reheating is crucial too. You want an internal temp of 165 degrees Fahrenheit, not just a half-warmed plate that's lava on the edges and ice cold in the middle. But the bottom line is that leftovers don't have to be a shameful fridge secret. They're a cultural artifact, a scientific experiment, and maybe the most underrated culinary category of all. So the next time someone looks down on your leftover meal, you remind them, you're not eating scraps. You're eating food that's been upgraded by time itself. So what do you think? And what's the most questionable leftover you've eaten and lived to tell the tale? Let us know in the comments below. And while you're at it, check out some of these other videos from Weird History Food.